My name is Eleanor. I'm 73 years old, and I never thought that having brain surgery would be the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because of the surgery itself, mind you, but because it finally showed me who my family really was. And honey, when you mess with a grandmother who survived 7 decades of life's curveballs, you better believe there's going to be consequences. What they did to me while I lay helpless in that hospital bed was unforgivable. But what I did to them afterward, well, let's just say they learned that underestimating an old lady was their biggest mistake. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now, let me tell you how this all started. I've lived in Portland, Oregon my whole life, raised 3 children after my husband passed. When I was only 45, my son Michael, 48, runs a successful law firm downtown. My daughter Patricia, 45, married a wealthy surgeon and lives in the fancy West Hills neighborhood. And my youngest, David, 42, works in tech and thinks he's God's gift to Silicon Valley. All three of them have beautiful homes, successful careers, and children of their own. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. But here's what nobody saw. For the past 20 years, I had been the family's unpaid servant, babysitter, and bank account. When Patricia needed someone to watch her twins every weekend so she could attend charity galas, oh, Mom can do it. When Michael needed a loan to start his law practice, Mom will help us out. When David wanted someone to house sit his expensive condo while he traveled for work every month, Mom loves taking care of things. I had spent my golden years being available 24/7 for their convenience, never complaining, always saying yes. Christmas dinners at my house for 20 people, of course, birthday parties for the grandchildren, with me doing all the cooking and cleaning, naturally. Emergency babysitting at midnight because they had important plans. Call Grandma Eleanor, she has nothing else to do. I'll never forget Patricia's exact words during last Thanksgiving dinner. She was complaining to her friends about how hard it was to find reliable childcare. Thank God for Mom, she said, laughing. She's basically our live-in nanny, except we don't have to pay her. Sometimes I think she enjoys taking care of everyone more than having her own life. What else would she do with her time anyway? The whole table laughed. Even my own grandchildren giggled along. They saw me as nothing more than a convenient grandmother-shaped service provider. That should have been my wake-up call, but I was too busy being grateful that they wanted me around at all. My late husband George always used to say, "Eleanor, you give too much of yourself away. Save some for you." I thought I was just being a good mother, a loving grandmother. I was really being a fool. Over the years, I had lent them more than $200,000 combined, down payments for houses, business loans, temporary help during rough patches that somehow never got paid back. I kept meticulous records, thinking someday they'd remember to repay me. They never even acknowledged these were loans. The headache started about 8 months ago. At first, I dismissed them, probably just stress from organizing Patricia's elaborate 45th birthday party Then came the dizziness, the fatigue that sleep couldn't cure, the moments where I'd forget what I was saying mid-sentence. Sometimes I'd stand up too quickly and the world would spin violently around me. "You're just getting older, Mom," Michael said when I mentioned feeling unwell. "Maybe you should slow down a bit, take fewer responsibilities." But did he offer to hire actual babysitters for his kids, or find someone else to clean his house twice a week? Of course not. The irony was thick. Slow down, but keep doing everything for them. David was even more dismissive. "Mom, you're probably just stressed from doing too much. You need to learn to say no sometimes." This from the son who called me every week with some new favor, some new crisis that only Grandma Eleanor could solve. Just a month before, he'd asked me to fly to Seattle to house sit while his regular sitter was on vacation, even though I'd mentioned not feeling well. Patricia's response was the most hurtful. "Mother, you've always been dramatic about your health. Remember when you thought you had that heart problem and it was just anxiety? Maybe you should see someone about managing stress better." She said this while asking me to watch her kids for an entire weekend so she could attend a spa retreat with her friends. The morning everything changed, I was at David's condo feeding his expensive tropical fish while he was in Japan on business. He'd called it a quick favor that would only take a few minutes each day. Of course, it involved a 45-minute drive each way, and caring for his demanding pets for 2 weeks straight. I was standing in his gleaming kitchen, trying to remember if I'd already fed the angelfish when the headache hit like a sledgehammer. This wasn't like the others. This was pure agony, as if someone was driving railroad spikes through my skull. The room spun violently, and I remember gripping the granite counter, trying to stay upright. My vision blurred, then tunneled, then disappeared entirely. I collapsed right there on his cold marble floor, alone and terrified, with no idea if I would ever wake up again. The last thought I had before darkness claimed me was wondering how long it would be before anyone found me. David was halfway around the world, and I wasn't expected anywhere else for days. I could die in this sterile apartment, and it might be a week before anyone noticed I was missing. That thought, that I mattered so little to my own family that I could disappear without anyone caring, was almost worse than the physical pain crushing my skull. David's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, found me 3 hours later when she came to borrow a cup of sugar. Bless that woman, she took one look at me unconscious on the floor and called 911. And she didn't hesitate, didn't worry about overreacting, didn't wonder if she should call David first for permission. She just acted like a decent human being and possibly saved my life. I have vague memories of the ambulance ride, voices shouting medical terms I didn't understand, someone squeezing my hand and telling me to hang on, the wail of sirens that seemed to go on forever. Miss Chen rode with me to the hospital, this woman who barely knew me showing more concern for my well-being than my own children ever had. When I woke up in the emergency room, Mrs. Chen was still there, holding my hand and talking softly to me. Her kind face was the first thing I saw, not the faces of my children, not the people who should have been there when I needed them most. The doctors ran some tests, she said gently, her accent making her words sound even more compassionate. They're concerned about what caused your collapse. They need to do more scans. The ER doctor, a kind young woman named Dr. Martinez, explained that my symptoms suggested something serious was happening in my brain. We need to do an MRI immediately, she said with professional compassion. I've already contacted your emergency contacts, your children. They said they were making arrangements to come. Making arrangements. Such a clinical way to say they couldn't be bothered to drop everything for their mother's medical emergency. When Miss Chen had found me unconscious, she didn't make arrangements. She called for help and stayed by my side. The MRI results came back 6 hours later, and Dr. Martinez's expression told me everything before she spoke. She pulled up a chair beside my bed and showed me the images on her tablet. Mrs. Reynolds, we found a tumor in your right frontal lobe. It's about the size of a golf ball, and it's pressing against critical areas of your brain. Her voice was gentle but direct. Based on its characteristics, we believe it's likely a meningioma, which is typically benign, but its location and size require immediate surgical removal. A tumor. The word seemed to echo in the sterile hospital room. At 73 years old, I was facing brain surgery, and the terror was overwhelming. But you know what was worse than the fear? The crushing loneliness. I asked the nurse if my children had called for updates. Not since the initial contact, she said sympathetically. But I'm sure they're busy making travel plans. 24 hours passed. No calls. No visits. No flowers. Nothing. Mrs. Chen visited twice, bringing me homemade soup and sitting quietly while I cried. A woman I'd barely spoken to in 5 years was showing me more love and support than my own flesh and blood. Dr. Martinez returned with a neurosurgeon, Patel, and their serious expressions made my stomach clench with dread. Mrs. Reynolds, Dr. Patel began, we need to schedule your surgery as soon as possible. The tumor is continuing to grow and the pressure it's creating could cause permanent damage or even be life-threatening. He explained the procedure in detail. They would remove a section of my skull, carefully extract the tumor from the membrane surrounding my brain, then replace the bone and close the incision. The surgery would take approximately 6 hours, followed by at least 3 days in intensive care. The procedure carries risks, as any brain surgery does, he said carefully. Stroke, paralysis, infection, even death. But given the progressive nature of your symptoms, the risks of not operating are great. I signed the consent forms with shaking hands, acknowledging that I might not survive the procedure. I was facing the possibility of death, and I was doing it completely alone. The people who should have been holding my hand, asking questions, advocating for my care, they were nowhere to be found. That's when I discovered exactly where they were, and it broke something inside me that has never fully healed. Unable to sleep, I'd asked the night nurse to help me check my phone. The screen lit up with notifications from Facebook and Instagram, posts my children had been tagged in, updates they'd shared, photos they'd uploaded while their mother lay in a hospital bed facing brain surgery. Patricia had posted a selfie from what was clearly a beautiful resort, captioned, "Perfect weekend celebrating love with my favorite people. Sometimes you just need a break from regular life to focus on what really matters." She was at a wedding in Napa Valley, wearing an expensive dress and holding a champagne glass, smiling radiantly. Michael had shared photos of himself in a tuxedo, escorting an elderly woman down the aisle. The caption read, "Honored to walk beautiful Miss Davidson down the aisle today, since her father couldn't be here. Family is everything. Wedding day, family." The irony was suffocating. He was playing devoted family member to a stranger while his own mother faced life-threatening surgery alone. David's Instagram story showed him behind a camera, taking professional photos of the happy couple. Best wedding photographer gig ever. Beautiful day, beautiful people, beautiful memories being made. Wedding photography, living my best life. They weren't just absent. They were actively celebrating someone else's family milestone, while their own mother might be dying. Patricia was the maid of honor. Michael had been asked to walk the bride down the aisle, and David was the official photographer. This wasn't a casual attendance at an acquaintance's wedding. This was a major family event for people who weren't even their family, while they completely ignored their actual family emergency. The night before my surgery, as I lay in that hospital bed signing forms that acknowledged I might not survive, I finally understood what my husband had been trying to tell me all those years. I had given so much of myself away that my own children saw me as disposable, available when convenient, invisible when. Mrs. Chen arrived at 6 a.m. on the morning of my surgery, carrying a small bouquet of flowers from her garden and a thermos of tea. "I thought you might want some company before they take you in," she said simply. This woman, who owed me nothing, had gotten up before dawn to be there for me. Meanwhile, my own children were probably sleeping off hangovers from the wedding reception. As the pre-surgery team prepared me, Mrs. Chen held my hand and told me about her own mother, who had passed away in China 20 years earlier. "She always said that the people who matter will show up when you need them," she said softly. "And the people who don't show up, they tell you who they really are. Believe them." The anesthesiologist asked me to count backward from 10. As the medication flowed through my IV, my last conscious thought was wondering if my children would even call the hospital to check if I'd survived. Waking up after brain surgery is nothing like in the movies. There was no dramatic moment of consciousness, just a gradual, disorienting emergence into a world of pain and confusion. Voices floated around me, hands touched me, machines beeped, but everything felt disconnected, as if happening to someone else. When I finally surfaced more completely, the first face I saw was Mrs. Chen's. She was sitting beside my ICU bed, knitting something soft and blue. And when she noticed my eyes open, her face lit up with relief. "Eleanor," she whispered, setting aside her knitting and taking my hand. "Surgery went perfectly. Dr. Patel said they got the entire tumor. You're going to be fine." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the breathing tube. She offered me ice chips from a cup beside the bed, talking softly while I struggled to remember where I was and what had happened. "It's been 2 days," she explained. "You've been unconscious, but all your signs are good. The nurses say you're healing beautifully." She paused, then added gently, "Your children, they haven't called." Even in my medicated haze, that information hit me like a physical blow. 2 days. I had been unconscious for 2 days after major brain surgery, and my own children hadn't even called to check if I was alive. A nurse appeared, Jennifer, according to her name tag, and she had the kind, tired eyes of someone who had seen too much human suffering. "Welcome back, Miss Reynolds," she said, checking the monitors above my head. "You gave us quite a scare there for a while, but Dr. Patel is very pleased with how everything went." Over the next few days, as my mind cleared and my strength slowly returned, the full scope of my children's betrayal became crystal clear. Jennifer told me that the hospital had called them multiple times with updates. The first call, immediately after surgery, had gone to voicemail. The second call, when I'd had some complications with my blood pressure, had been answered by Patricia, who said she'd pass along the information to her siblings, but didn't ask any questions about my condition. The third call, when I developed a post-surgical infection that required additional medication, had been answered by Michael. According to Jennifer, he'd seemed annoyed by the interruption and asked if the situation was actually serious or just routine hospital drama. "What did you tell him?" I asked. Jennifer's expression hardened. I told him his mother had just survived 6 hours of brain surgery and was fighting an infection that could potentially be life-threatening. His response was that he was sure the medical staff had everything under control and to only call if there was a real emergency. I closed my eyes, letting that sink in. In their minds, brain surgery wasn't a real emergency worthy of their attention. Miss Chen visited every day, bringing fresh flowers, homemade meals, and quiet companionship. She'd sit by my bed reading or knitting while I slept, and when I was awake, she'd tell me stories about her life in China, her journey to America, her own struggles with family who didn't appreciate her sacrifices. "You know what I learned?" she said one afternoon, looking up from her knitting. "When people show you who they are, you must believe them. Your children have shown you that they see you as a convenience, not a person. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" On my 5th day in the hospital, I finally asked Jennifer to bring me my phone. It was time to see exactly what my children had been doing while I fought for my life. The images that greeted me were like salt in an open wound. More wedding photos, post-wedding brunch at an expensive Napa Valley resort, wine-tasting adventures with captions about perfect family weekends and making memories that matter. Patricia had even posted a group photo with the caption "Family Complete," as if my absence was not only expected but preferred. They looked so happy, so carefree, so utterly unburdened by any concern for their mother who might be dying in a hospital bed 2 states away. The contrast was devastating. While I was learning to walk again, relearning how to write my own name, they were learning about vintage Cabernets and artisanal cheese pairings. That night, alone in my hospital room with only the steady beeping of monitors for company, I had what I can only call an awakening. The hurt was still there. Lord knows, a mother's heart doesn't stop breaking just because her children disappoint her. But underneath that pain, something else was growing. Something I hadn't felt in decades: pure, righteous anger. Not the hot rage that burns out quickly, but the cold, calculating fury that comes from finally seeing the truth clearly. My children had built their entire adult lives around the assumption that mom would always be there, always available, always willing to sacrifice her own needs for theirs. They had taken my love for granted for so long that they'd forgotten it was a choice, not an obligation. As I lay there in that hospital bed, watching the numbers on my monitors prove that I was indeed still alive despite their complete lack of concern, I made a decision that would change everything. They had shown me exactly what I meant to them. Nothing. Now it was time to show them exactly what they meant. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn a few things about people. You learn how to read them, how to understand what makes them tick, and most importantly, how to use that knowledge when necessary. My children thought they knew me, sweet, accommodating Grandma Eleanor, who would always be there with a smile and a helping hand. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. I spent my remaining days in the hospital planning, not sleeping, not wallowing in self-pity, but strategically planning the most comprehensive revenge campaign a 73-year-old woman had ever orchestrated. And honey, when someone with 7 decades of life experience puts her mind to something, you better believe it's going to be thorough. First, I needed to survive and recover. That was non-negotiable. I had work to do, and I couldn't do it from a hospital bed or a grave. I threw myself into physical therapy with a determination that impressed even the cynical therapists who had seen it all. When they said I needed to walk 10 steps, I walked 20. When they said I should rest, I asked for additional exercises. "Mrs. Reynolds," my physical therapist Sarah said one day, "I've never seen someone your age recover this quickly from major brain surgery. What's motivating you?" I smiled sweetly. "I have some unfinished business to attend to." While I regained my strength, I used my phone to make calls. The first was to my lawyer, Harold Brennan, who had handled my husband's estate 20 years earlier. Harold was old-school Portland establishment, the kind of lawyer who had handled prominent families for decades and knew where all the bodies were buried. "Harold," I said when he answered, "I need you to come to the hospital. We have some estate planning to discuss." Harold arrived that afternoon with his leather briefcase and a concerned expression. He'd known me since I was young, had watched my children grow up, and had always treated me with the respect my own family never showed. Eleanor, what's happening? Are you all right? I told him everything about the years of being taken for granted, about the surgery they couldn't be bothered to attend, about finally seeing my children for what they really were. Harold listened without judgment. Good lawyers learn to do that. I want to make significant changes to my will, and I want to establish a trust that will teach them exactly what they've lost. We spent 3 hours going through every detail. My house, worth $800,000 in Portland's inflated market, would go to Mrs. Chen, who had shown me more kindness in a week than my children had in years. My savings, accumulated through decades of careful living, would be donated to a charity supporting elderly people with no family support, with one condition: the charity would be named in honor of Mrs. Chen's mother. The real estate investments George and I had made over the years, now worth over $2 million, would go into a trust. My children could inherit, but only if they could prove they had spent at least 200 hours each year for 5 consecutive years volunteering with elderly or disabled people, not writing checks, actually showing up and providing hands-on care. That's quite specific, Harold said carefully. It's called poetic justice, I replied. They'll learn the value of showing up for people who need them, or they'll get nothing. The business loans I had made to my children over the years, loans they'd conveniently forgotten were supposed to be repaid, those would be transferred to a collection agency. Let them deal with professional debt collectors and see how it feels to be pursued for money they owe. My second call was to Jennifer Walsh at First National Bank, where I had maintained accounts for 43 years. Jennifer had processed every family loan, every bailout, every time I'd transferred money to help my ungrateful children. Jennifer, I need to make some changes to my accounts, I said. I'm implementing new financial boundaries. I moved my money to a new account that only I could access. The automatic transfers to my children's accounts, money I'd been sending monthly to help with their mortgages and expenses, would stop immediately. The credit cards I had co-signed for emergency use would be canceled. The safety net I had provided for decades would disappear over. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Reynolds? Jennifer asked. This is quite a significant change. I'm more sure of this than anything I've done in 20 years. But the real masterstroke was my third call, to Patricia's housekeeper. Maria was from Guatemala, worked 3 jobs to support her family, spoke 5 languages fluently, and had a degree in accounting that wasn't recognized in the US. She was also one of the most intelligent, hardworking people I'd ever met, far more qualified than she was given credit for. Maria said when she answered, "How would you like a job opportunity that pays 3 times what you're making now and includes full benefits and college tuition assistance for your daughter?" Mrs. Eleanor, what kind of job? I'm starting a premium household services company, and I need a business manager, someone I trust completely. Maria was quiet for a long moment. You want me to work for you instead of Mrs. Patricia? I want you to work with me as an equal partner. You'll handle all the business operations, client relations, and financial management. I'll handle marketing and client acquisition. We'll split the profits. I could hear the emotion in her voice. Mrs. Eleanor, are you serious? You would trust me with so much responsibility? Maria, you've been managing Patricia's household for 5 years. You handle her schedule, her finances, her children, her entire life. You're the most competent person I know. It's time someone recognized your true value. Within an hour, Maria had given Patricia her note. She told me later that Patricia's response was predictably selfish. But Maria, who's going to handle everything? I can't possibly manage without you. Not congratulations on the new opportunity, not happiness for Maria's advancement, just panic about her own convenience. That evening I called Mrs. Chen and told her about my plans. She listened thoughtfully, then asked, Eleanor, are you sure this is what you want? Revenge can be a prison of its own. This isn't revenge, I said carefully. This is consequent. For the first time in 20 years, my children are going to experience the natural results of their choices. They chose to treat me as disposable. Now they'll discover what life is like without me. By the time I was discharged from the hospital 2 weeks later, all the pieces were in place. Mrs. Chen drove me home from the hospital, helping me up the front steps of the house where I had lived for 45 years. The house felt different now, quieter. but also lighter somehow, as if a weight I didn't know I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. My children, of course, had no idea I was even home from the hospital. They were probably assuming I was fine, that brain surgery was no big deal, that good old mom would bounce right back to her regular routine of serving their every need. They were about to get their first surprise. Maria came by that afternoon to discuss our business plans. Seeing her in my living room instead of Patricia's kitchen felt like a small victory already. We spent 3 hours creating our service packages, setting our rates, and planning our marketing strategy. Maria's business acumen was impressive. She had ideas I never would have considered and a natural understanding of what affluent families actually needed. We should charge premium rates, she said firmly. Your children taught me that wealthy people don't respect anything they get cheaply. They associate high prices with high quality. What did you have in mind? House management, $200 per day. Childcare, $50 per hour. Event planning and execution, $2,000 plus expenses. Pet care, 70. And for comprehensive family support, the kind you used to provide for free, $500 per day minimum. I nearly choked. Maria, those rates are astronomical. No, Mrs. Eleanor. Those rates are fair. I've been watching how wealthy families operate for 5 years. They pay their landscapers $200 a day. They pay their personal trainers $150 an hour. They pay their house cleaners $300 per visit. But somehow, family members are expected to work for free. She was right. Of course, I had been undervaluing my own time and skills for decades. The first call came Tuesday morning, exactly as I had anticipated. Patricia's voice was strained with barely contained panic. Mom, finally, we've been trying to reach you for days. Where have you been? I noted that their days of trying to reach me consisted of one voicemail left the night before, probably when they realized they needed something. I was in the hospital, I said calmly. I had brain surgery. A pause that stretched long enough for me to count heartbeat. Then, brain surgery? Oh my God. Mom, why didn't you tell us? We were out of town, but are you okay? I'm fine, dear. The tumor is gone and I'm recovering nicely. Well, thank goodness for that. She didn't ask about the tumor, how large it was, whether it was cancerous, what the recovery process involved. Nothing. Listen, Mom, I really need a favor. It's Emma's birthday party this Saturday, and you know how much she loves your chocolate cake. Plus, could you watch the kids Friday night? Robert and I have that charity auction, and you know how important those events are for his practice. There it was. Not I'm so sorry we weren't there for you. Not how can we help with your recovery. Just straight to asking for favors, as if brain surgery was equivalent to a mild cold. Oh, sweetheart, I said in my most grandmotherly voice. I'm afraid that won't be possible. What do you mean it won't be possible? Mom, this is really important. Emma will be so disappointed if Grandma's not there with her special cake. I mean that I won't be available to babysit or bake anymore. I'm making some changes to how I spend my time. I could practically hear Patricia's brain trying to process this information. In 30 years, I had never said no to a request from any of my children. Mom, are you feeling all right? Maybe the surgery affected. You're not thinking clearly. Of course you'll make Emma's cake. You always make the cakes. Patricia, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. I won't be baking, babysitting, house sitting, or providing any of the services I used to provide. I'm retired from being the family servant. The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. This is ridiculous, she finally sputtered. You can't. What are you going to do with your time? Well, actually, I'm starting a new business, a comprehensive household management service, very exclusive, very expensive, but incredibly thorough. We provide cooking, cleaning, childcare, pet care, house sitting, all the services busy professional families need. That's, that's great, Mom, but surely family gets a discount? I laughed, and it felt so good I almost couldn't stop. Oh, honey, family doesn't get a discount. Family pays premium rates. After all, you get what you pay for. Michael called 2 hours later, clearly having been briefed by his sister. He tried a different approach, the concerned son routine. Mom, Patricia told me about this business idea of yours. Don't you think you should be resting after surgery? Maybe you're pushing yourself too hard, trying to prove you're still capable. Michael, I've never been more capable. In fact, I should mention that I'll need you to start making arrangements for repaying the $47,000 I lent you for your law practice. My business accountant recommends I collect on outstanding debts as part of my new financial planning strategy. Another beautiful silence. Michael had never even acknowledged that loan was supposed to be repaid. In his mind, it was just mom helping out, not a real debt with real expectations. Mom, that wasn't a loan. That was, you were helping with my startup costs. Family helping family. Do you have that in writings? Because my records show a promissory note with your signature witnessed and notarized. Would you like me to send you a copy? Of course he didn't have it in writing. None of them ever thought they'd need to formalize their arrangements with dear old pushover mom. David's call came that evening, and by then, all three siblings had clearly been conferring. He went straight for the guilt trip. Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't like you at all. We're worried about you. Maybe the surgery caused some personality change. I think you should see a doctor. I saw several doctors, David. They all said the surgery was completely successful and my mental faculties are perfect. But speaking of changes, I won't be able to house sit your condo anymore. However, my new business would be happy to provide comprehensive property management services for $500 per day, plus expenses. $500 a day? Mom, you used to do it for free. That was before I realized my time has value, Dave. It was also before I understood that my own children would abandon me during brain surgery to attend a party. We didn't abandon you. We were at an important wedding, David protested. More important than your mother's life-threatening surgery? It wasn't life-threatening. You're fine, David. I could have died on that operating table. The tumor was pressing against vital areas of my brain. I signed consent forms acknowledging that I might not survive the procedure. And you were taking photographs at someone else's wedding celebration. For the first time in our conversation, David was quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. Mom, we didn't know it was that serious. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't call the hospital. You didn't check on me. You assumed I would be fine because it was convenient for you to assume that. After hanging up on David, I knew it was time to launch the most devastating phase of my plan. You see, my children had made one critical error in their calculation. They had forgotten that when you've lived in the same community for 45 years, when you've volunteered at every charity event and knew every important family in Portland, you accumulate a certain kind of power, social power, the kind my children had completely forgotten I possessed. I started making calls to the people who kept my children's businesses running, their reputations intact, their bank accounts full. And honey, when a respected community elder starts telling carefully chosen truths about reliability and family values, people listen. Miss Harrison, the mayor's wife and chairwoman of the Children's Hospital Charity Board, answered on the second ring. Eleanor, how wonderful to hear from you. How are you feeling after your surgery? Now that was interesting. Miss Harrison knew about my surgery when my own children had barely acknowledged it. Word travels fast in Portland's philanthropic circles, especially when it involves someone who's been volunteering reliably for decades. I'm recovering beautifully, thank you for asking. Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. I'm starting a new venture, and I wanted to tell you about it personally. I explained my premium household management service, emphasizing the quality, discretion, and absolute reliability we would provide. Mrs. Harrison was immediately interested. Eleanor, this sounds perfect. You know how impossible it is to find trustworthy help these days, people who actually show up when they say they will. Exactly, we're building our reputation on reliability and professional commitment. Unlike some service providers who might cut corners or prioritize social events over their responsibilities. I let that observation hang in the air. Mrs. Harrison was sharp. She caught my meaning immediately. Oh my, she said carefully. That does sound refreshingly professional. And I assume you've researched the reliability of other local service providers extensively. In fact, I was quite shocked to learn that some local professionals, even those in law and medicine, can't be trusted to honor their commitments when it truly matters. Some people think social obligations are more important than genuine emergencies. By the end of our conversation, Mrs. Harrison had booked my services for her upcoming charity gala and promised to recommend me to 5 other prominent families. She also, quite casually, mentioned that she'd been reconsidering which law firm to use for the charity's legal needs. "We really need someone we can depend on," she said meaningfully. "Someone who understands that showing up matters, especially during critical situations." My next call was to Dr. Patricia Thornton, head of the medical board at Portland General Hospital, where my son-in-law Robert was trying to get promoted to chief of surgery. Thornton had been at my husband's bedside when he passed, had attended George's funeral, and sent me Christmas cards for 20 years. "Eleanor, I heard about your surgery through the hospital network. I'm so sorry I couldn't visit. I was at a conference in Seattle. How are you managing?" "Much better now, thanks to the incredible care I received. Though I was surprised how few family visitors I had during my stay. It really shows you who prioritizes what in life." Dr. Thornton made a sympathetic sound. "Family situations can be complex. Indeed, in fact, I learned some disturbing things about priorities during my hospitalization. Imagine my shock when I discovered that some people, even medical professionals, think social events are more important than family medical emergencies. Can you imagine a doctor prioritizing a party over a patient, even if that patient is their own family member?" Another meaningful pause. That would be deeply concerning behavior for someone in the medical field. The kind of judgment issue that would raise serious questions about professional character. My thoughts exactly. "Anyway, I'm calling because I'm starting a premium service business, and I know your family appreciates quality and absolute reliability." By the time I hung up, Thornton had booked my services for her daughter's engagement party and mentioned almost as an afterthought that the chief of surgery position required someone with impeccable personal judgment and unquestionable family values. I made 15 more calls that week to the tech CEO whose company David was courting for a major contract, to the school board president who oversaw the district where Patricia served as PTA treasurer, to the senior partners at the consulting firm where Michael was hoping to make partner next year. Each conversation was perfectly pleasant, perfectly professional, and perfectly devastating. I never mentioned my children by name. I never made direct accusations. I simply shared my story about unreliable people who prioritize social events over genuine emergencies, and let these influential people draw their own conclusions about the kind of character that would abandon a 73-year-old mother during brain surgery. Within 10 days, the effects began showing like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Michael called first, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. It was a Thursday morning, exactly 2 weeks after our last conversation, and I could hear the desperation even through the phone. "Mom, what did you say to the Williamson group? They just canceled their consultation meeting, and when I pressed them for an explanation, Mrs. Williamson said they had concerns about our firm's family values and reliability. They specifically mentioned something about people who abandon family during medical emergencies. I didn't say anything inappropriate, Michael. I simply mentioned that my new business prioritizes showing up for commitments, unlike some people who might abandon family members during critical situations. You're sabotaging my career. I'm building my own career, son. If that somehow affects yours, perhaps you should examine why that might be happening. This is insane. They were going to be our biggest client this year, and I was going to be your mother during brain surgery. But somehow that wasn't important enough for you to show up." David called 2 hours later, nearly hysterical. I could hear the panic in his voice, the same tone he'd used as a child when he'd broken something valuable and was trying to avoid consequences. "Mom, TechFlow pulled out of our partnership deal. They said they needed to work with people who understand priorities and family obligations." "What the hell did you tell them?" "I told them about my new business venture, Dave. I also happened to mention that I was disappointed by some local professionals who prioritize parties over family emergencies. They seemed quite concerned about working with people who demonstrate such poor judgment." "This is insane. You're destroying our lives over a weekend wedding." "No, darling, I'm showing you the consequences of your choices. the same way you showed me the consequences of loving you unconditionally for 30 years. That contract was worth $2.3 million. My business partner is furious. He's talking about dissolving our partnership because he says I clearly have character issues. Well, David, actions do have consequences. Maybe you should have thought about that before abandoning your mother for a photo shoot. Patricia's call came that evening, and she was absolutely livid. I could hear Robert arguing with someone in the background, his voice raised in frustration. Mother, Robert's promotion has been put under review. Dr. Thornton told him they needed to evaluate his personal character and family commitment before making their final decision. She also suddenly resigned from the hospital charity board I chair, saying she's found a new event management service that understands the importance of showing up when people count on you. This is you, isn't it? This is me finally understanding my worth, Patricia. And it's the community finally seeing your true character. My true character? I'm a pillar of this community. I volunteer, I fundraise, I organize charity events. You abandoned your mother during brain surgery to attend a party, sweetheart. That's your character. One weekend doesn't define who we are as people, doesn't it? Because that one weekend told me everything I needed to know about where I rank in your priorities. And apparently it told the same story to a lot of other people in this community. But the most beautiful moment came 3 weeks later, when all 3 of my children showed up at my door together. They looked haggard, desperate, and for the first time in decades, they needed something from me that they couldn't get anywhere else. My forgiveness and my silence. I watched them through my living room window as they stood on my front porch, clearly arguing about who should knock first. Michael was gesturing angrily, Patricia was crying, and David looked like he hadn't slept in days. Finally, Michael straightened his shoulders and rang the door. I took my time answering, making myself a cup of tea first and checking my appearance in the hallway mirror. When I finally opened the door, all 3 of them started talking at once. Mom, we need to, please, you have to, this has gone too far. I held up my hand and the desperation in their faces was so complete that they actually stopped talking. Come in, I said calmly. We'll discuss this properly. I served them tea in my best china, the set they had never bothered to compliment, the wedding gift from George's mother that I had treasured for 40 years. They sat stiffly on my sofa, looking like children called to the principal's office. Michael cleared his throat, clearly elected as the spokesperson. Mom, we know we hurt you. We know we should have been there for your surgery. We were selfish, Patricia added, tears streaming down her face. We took you for granted. We're sorry, David finished, his voice breaking. Really, truly sorry. Please, you have to call off this campaign against us. I set down my teacup and looked at each of them in turn. These were my babies, the children I had loved and sacrificed for and protected their entire lives. They were also the adults who had abandoned me when I needed them most. I haven't called off anything, I said quietly. I've simply started living my life according to the same principles you've been teaching me for years. What principles? Patricia asked, genuinely confused. That love is conditional, that showing up is optional, that family obligations only flow in one direction. You've been teaching me these lessons for decades, and I'm a very good student. That's not. We don't believe those things, David protested. Your actions say otherwise. When you needed money, I was there. When you needed childcare, I was there. When you needed someone to handle your problems, I was there. But when I needed you most, you were at a party. It was one mistake. Michael exploded, his lawyer training finally kicking in. One weekend. You can't destroy our careers over one weekend. It was the final demonstration of a pattern that's been going on for 20 years, Michael. You've treated me like hired help, and not very well compensated hired help at that. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and walked to my mantelpiece where I kept the family photos. I picked up the newest one from Patricia's birthday party last year, where I had done all the cooking, decorating, and cleanup while they posed for pictures and posted about their perfect family celebration. Here's what's going to happen, I said, still looking at the photo. Maria and I have built a very successful business in just 6 weeks. We're booked solid for the next 4 months, and our waiting list includes some of the most prominent families in Portland. We provide the kind of reliable professional service that busy families need. And more importantly, we show up when we say we will. I turned back to them, setting the photo down with deliberate care. You are welcome to hire our services, just like any other client. Our rates are premium, but our results are guaranteed. We show up when we say we will. We do what we promise to do. We treat our commitments as sacred. You want us to pay you to be our mother? Patricia's voice was incredulous, as if the very concept was absurd. I want you to pay me to provide the services you've been taking for free for 20 years. The mothering, the real mothering, the love and support and genuine concern, that's not for sale. That has to be earned back. Michael asked quietly, and for the first time since they'd arrived, I heard something other than panic in his voice. How do we earn it back? For the first time since they'd walked through my door, I smiled. Not the accommodating grandmother smile they were used to, but something new, something that belonged entirely to me. You start by understanding that relationships are reciprocal. You start by showing up not just when it's convenient, but when it matters most. You start by seeing me as a person with inherent value, not just a resource to be exploited when you need something. And if we do that, David asked, his voice small and uncertain, then maybe eventually we can rebuild something real. But it won't be the same relationship we had before, where I gave everything and you took everything for granted. It will have to be something different, something equal, something mutual. They left that day without any promises from me, but with complete understanding of what they had lost and what it would take to earn it back. The looks on their faces as they walked to their cars, that mixture of shock, grief, and dawning comprehension, was worth every sleepless night I had spent in that hospital bed. 6 months later, I'm happy to report that Eleanor's Premium Household Services is the most sought-after service company in Portland. Maria and I have hired 12 employees, all of them people who understand the value of reliability and showing up when it matters. We have an 8-month waiting list and have turned down more business than we can handle. More importantly, my relationship with my children is slowly healing, but on completely new terms. Michael now pays fair market rates when he needs help with his kids, and he shows up for family dinners without being asked 3 times. He lost the Williamson contract, but he learned something more valuable, that reputation matters, and that family loyalty is part of character. Patricia hired my company to cater all her charity events, and she calls every Sunday morning to check on my health. She asks real questions now, listens to the answers, and remembers what I tell her. Robert didn't get the promotion this year, but he's working to rebuild his reputation by volunteering at the free clinic every weekend. David actually flew back from a crucial business conference when I had a minor fender bender last month. He didn't just call to check if I was okay. He sat in the hospital waiting room for 4 hours while they did precautionary x-rays, the same way Mrs. Chen had sat with me during my surgery. They're learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, that love isn't just something you receive passively, it's something you actively give, something you earn through consistent actions, something you demonstrate through your choices when it really counts. And I'm learning that respect isn't something you beg for or hope to receive someday. It's something you require, something you maintain, something you model through your own behavior. Mrs. Chen and I have become the closest of friends. She's teaching me Mandarin, and I'm teaching her my mother's secret apple pie recipe. She was the first person to hire my services, even though I told her I'd work for free. Eleanor, she said firmly, your time has value. Your skills have tremendous value. Don't you ever forget that again. Last month, I got a call from a woman in Seattle who had heard about my story through mutual friends. She was facing her own family crisis, adult children who took her for granted, a recent health scare that they had minimized and ignored. She wanted to know how I had found the courage to change everything. Honey, I told her, courage isn't something you find lying around. It's something you build, one boundary at a time, one no at a time, one moment of self-respect at a time. Start with one small boundary and see how it feels. Then build from there. Because here's what I learned during those long, terrifying days in the hospital, facing brain surgery alone. The people who truly love you will show up when it matters most. The people who don't will always have elaborate excuses that sound reasonable on the surface, but crumble under scrutiny. And once you understand the difference, once you stop accepting excuses as expressions of love, your entire world transforms. My children thought they knew me, sweet, accommodating Grandma Eleanor who would always say yes, always be available, always put everyone else's needs ahead of her own dignity. They thought brain surgery might slow me down, make me more grateful for their occasional attention, more dependent on whatever scraps of affection they felt like offering. Instead, it woke me up. It showed me that I had been living as a supporting character in my own life story, and it gave me the courage to become the protagonist instead. These days, when someone asks me for a favor, I don't automatically say yes. I consider whether it's something I genuinely want to do, whether the relationship is mutual and respectful, whether the person asking has shown up for me when I needed them. And when my grandchildren ask me what the secret to happiness is, I tell them this: value yourself enough to require that others value you too. Show up for the people you love, and only accept relationships with people who show up for you in return. Everything else is just noise. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to teach family members to respect your boundaries? How did you handle being taken for granted by the people who should love you most? Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about Eleanor's approach to demanding respect. And if this story inspired you to value yourself more, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength when people least expect it. Remember, you're never too old to rewrite the rules of how people treat you. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be taken for granted anymore.